My 9-year-old granddaughter grabbed my sleeve, pulling me down to her level. Her little hands were trembling. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice barely catching over the clinking glasses of the crowded ballroom. "Please be careful. My parents are going to take your money after the party today." She shoved a crumpled piece of paper into my suit pocket and ran back into the crowd. 45 minutes later, I was gone, and what I did next would make them regret the day they ever decided to cross me. If you are watching this, take a deep breath, because what I am about to tell you is the kind of betrayal you never imagined could happen in your own family. Have you ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth? Let me know in the comments where you are watching from today, and hit that subscribe button to support this channel. Now let me tell you how my 75th birthday became the day I realized my son wanted to bury me. The crystal chandeliers of the 5-star hotel in downtown Columbus cast a warm golden glow over the ballroom. It was a lavish affair filled with politicians, local business owners, and the so-called elite of Ohio. It was all paid for by my money, of course. My son Bradley and his wife Monica had insisted on throwing me this massive party to celebrate my 75th birthday and the continued success of Callahan Freight, the logistics company I built from the ground up. Bradley was working the room in a bespoke Italian suit, shaking hands and laughing loudly. Monica was right beside him, draped in designer silk, flashing that perfectly white, hollow smile she reserved for people with high net worths. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the perfect, successful American family. But I always felt out of place in these rooms. Underneath my tailored tuxedo, my shoulders still carried the permanent ache of 40 years behind the wheel of a rig. My hands were still rough and calloused from changing blown-out tires in the freezing rain on the side of the interstate. I was a trucker who built an empire, but in my heart, I was still just a working man. I was standing near the ice sculpture when Bradley tapped a silver spoon against his champagne glass. The room quieted down. He raised his glass high, looking right at me with a gaze that felt entirely too rehearsed. To the man of the hour, Bradley announced, his voice booming over the speakers. "My father, Richard Callahan. He taught me everything I know about hard work, dedication, and family. We love you, Dad. Here is to many more years." The crowd erupted into applause. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved swiftly through the room, handing out fresh glasses of champagne for the toast. One of them handed a glass directly to me. I raised it, smiled for the flashing cameras, and took a long sip. That was when little Lily had run up to me. Sweet, quiet Lily. The only person in that room who possessed the genuine warmth of my late wife, Martha. After she whispered her terrifying warning and slipped the note into my pocket, I stood frozen. I wanted to call out to her, to ask her what she meant, but Monica suddenly materialized beside me, her hand gripping my arm a little too tightly. "Are you enjoying your special night, Richard?" Monica asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You look a little pale." I opened my mouth to reply, but the words caught in my throat. A sudden heavy wave of dizziness washed over me. The golden light of the chandeliers seemed to smear and stretch across the ceiling. The ambient chatter of the ballroom morphed into a low, buzzing static in my ears. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, but the room tilted slightly to the left. My heart began to pound against my ribs. This was not the fatigue of an old man. This was a chemical fog rolling into my brain. I took another breath, and my stomach churned violently. In my 40 years on the road, I had survived black ice in the Rocky Mountains, blown transmissions on steep downgrades, and exhausted nights where hallucination was just a blink away. I survived because I never ever ignored my gut instinct. When the steering wheel of an 18-wheeler goes completely light in your hands, you do not wait to see what happens. You know you are on ice and you react immediately to save your life. Right now, my body was sounding the exact same alarm. I was on ice. I was in danger. I looked down at the half-empty champagne glass in my hand. Then I looked up at Monica. Her eyes were fixed on me, but there was no warmth in them. They were sharp, calculating, and waiting. She was waiting for me to fall. I let the champagne glass slip from my fingers. It shattered against the marble floor, drawing gasps from the nearby guests. I doubled over, clutching my abdomen with both hands, letting out a loud, convincing groan of pain. "Oh my God." "Richard," Monica cried out, her voice pitched high for the benefit of the audience. "Bradley. Come here quickly, your father is sick." Bradley rushed over, his face masked in theatrical concern. "Dad. What is it? Is it your heart? My stomach?" I gasped out, forcing my voice to sound weak and breathless. "It is a bad cramp. Something I ate. I need to leave. I need to go home right now." "Let us take you up to a suite," Bradley insisted, grabbing my shoulder. "We can call a doctor to the hotel. Just come upstairs with us." His grip was firm, almost forceful. They wanted to isolate me. They wanted me in a hotel room where no one else could see what was happening. My mind was fighting through the thick, swirling fog of whatever was in that glass, but my survival instinct was razor sharp. "No," I barked, slapping his hand away with more strength than he expected. "I want my own bed. I am calling an Uber. Do not follow me. Stay here and entertain your guests. Do not make a scene and ruin the company image." I knew hitting his ego and his obsession with appearances would freeze him. It worked. Bradley hesitated, glancing nervously around at the wealthy investors watching us. I did not wait for his response. I pushed past them, using every ounce of willpower to keep my legs steady as I navigated through the crowd. The opulent lobby felt like a tunnel stretching endlessly in front of me. I burst through the heavy glass doors into the cool, sharp night air of Columbus. A black sedan was idling at the valet stand. I climbed into the back seat, slamming the door shut. "Drive," I told the driver, my voice suddenly losing its fake frailty, replaced by a cold, hard edge. "Get me out of here." As the car pulled away from the curb, I leaned back against the leather seat and reached a trembling hand into my suit pocket. My fingers brushed against the crumpled piece of paper my granddaughter had given me. The dizziness was pulling me down into a dark place, but the fury igniting in my chest burned brighter. I unfolded the note, ready to see exactly how deep the betrayal ran. The streetlights of downtown Columbus flashed through the windows, casting rhythmic shadows across the small piece of paper. I squinted through my blurred vision. It was a memo pad from a major bank, and on it, written in Bradley's distinct, sloppy handwriting, were a few terrifying sentences. "Transfer total control of the retirement fund. Signatures required tonight. Get it done before he realizes." My blood ran completely cold. The fog in my head momentarily cleared, pierced by the sharp blade of adrenaline. They were not just hoping I would step down. They were actively moving to seize my entire life work, my savings, the safety net I had built for our family. And they had drugged me to ensure I would be too incapacitated to stop them or read whatever documents they planned to shove in front of my face tonight. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It had been exactly 45 minutes since the party started. I was supposed to be celebrating a milestone surrounded by love. Instead, I was in the back of a stranger's car, poisoned by my own flesh and blood. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there, sir? You want me to take you to the hospital?" "No," I said, my voice steady, my mind locking into a gear I had not used in decades. The gear of a man who had everything to lose and absolutely no fear of a fight. "Do not take me home. Take me to the industrial park on the west side. Take me to the Callahan Freight headquarters." The battle lines had been drawn, and Bradley was about to learn that you never ever try to hijack a truck while the driver is still awake. The tires of the sedan hummed against the damp asphalt as we left the city center behind. I rolled the window down just a crack, letting the cold night air hit my face. The sharp breeze helped push back the chemical fog that was still trying to drag me under. I focused on my breathing, steady and deep the way I used to when I had to push through the final 100 miles of a grueling cross-country run. I turned on the overhead reading light and smoothed out the paper my granddaughter had slipped me. I had to read it again. I had to be absolutely sure my mind was not playing tricks on me. The words remained the same. It was definitely Bradley's handwriting. I would recognize those hurried, slanted letters anywhere. I taught him how to write his name at the kitchen table of our first apartment. Now those same hands had penned a blueprint for my destruction. Transfer total control of the retirement fund. Signatures required tonight. Get it done before he realizes. The retirement fund. Retirement. That was not just my money. That was the nest egg for 300 drivers and dispatchers who broke their backs to build Callahan Freight alongside me. Bradley was not just trying to rob his father. He planned to steal the futures of the men and women who actually did the heavy lifting. The sheer greed made my stomach churn. It was pure disgust. The city lights faded into the glow of the industrial park. 45 minutes after I left the party, the Uber pulled up to the gates of the Callahan Freight headquarters. The sprawling compound was quiet at this hour, bathed in the pale light of the moon. Rows of 18-wheelers sat parked in perfect alignment, resting before the morning shift. This was my real home. This asphalt, these diesel fumes, the hum of the lights. This was the empire I built with grease on my hands and dirt under my fingernails while my son learned to tie a silk tie. I handed the driver a crisp $100 bill and stepped out into the night. The cold air rushed through my thin tuxedo jacket, but I barely felt it. Adrenaline is a powerful fuel, and right now my tank was full. I walked up to the main entrance. A few years ago, Bradley had insisted on upgrading our security. He hired a tech firm to install biometric scanners and a digital log tracking every employee. He told me it was to modernize the company to bring us into the 21st century. He probably thought it would also keep an old dinosaur like me locked out of my own house if he ever needed to. But Bradley never understood the first rule of building anything. You always keep a master key. I quietly had the lead engineer wire a physical bypass into the main junction box secured with a keypad. I slid my hand behind a loose brick near the glass doors and punched in a 6-digit code. My late wife Martha's birth date. The heavy magnetic locks on the front doors disengaged with a solid, satisfying click. I pushed the glass door open and stepped into the silent, dark lobby. The building was completely empty. My dress shoes clicked against the polished concrete floor as I bypassed the glowing elevators and headed straight for the stairs. I climbed the 3 flights to the executive floor, my breathing heavy but my mind crystal clear. I walked past Bradley's corner office with its glass walls and imported leather furniture. I did not even look inside. Instead, I headed down the hall to the small, windowless server room at the back of the building. This was the brain of the company. It was where the financial mainframe lived, the system that controlled every dollar flowing in and out of Callahan Freight. The room was freezing, humming with the sound of cooling fans and blinking server racks. I sat down at the central terminal, an old heavy metal desk I had refused to throw away. I woke the computer screen and stared at the login prompt. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I was about to cross a line of no return. But then I remembered the hollow, predatory look in my daughter-in-law's eyes as she waited for me to collapse. I remembered my son holding that glass of champagne toasting to my health, while poison coursed through my veins. And I remembered little Lily terrified, whispering a warning that probably saved my life. I typed in my founder credentials, a level of access Bradley did not even know existed anymore. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I navigated through the labyrinth of corporate accounts until I reached the executive financial controls. My hands were perfectly steady now. I located the corporate black cards, the ones Bradley used to fund his lavish lifestyle, his country club memberships, and apparently $50,000 birthday parties designed to look good for the press. With one keystroke, I selected them all. I clicked Disable. Then I moved to the banking authorizations. I found Bradley's name listed as the primary signatory for all executive checks and wire transfers. I highlighted his profile, hit Revoke, and confirmed the action. I called this system Protocol Red. I had designed it years ago as a failsafe against hostile corporate takeovers. I just never imagined the hostile force would be my own flesh and blood. The system processed the commands. A small progress bar filled across the screen, followed by a final definitive beep. It was done. All corporate black cards were frozen. Bradley's check signing authority was gone. He was locked out of the company treasury. I leaned back in the creaky metal chair, staring at the glowing screen. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the trap to snap shut on his greedy fingers. I sat in the glow of the server room monitor, listening to the hum of the cooling fans. The deed was done. I slowly pushed the heavy metal chair back and stood up. My knees popped, a reminder of the miles on my body. But the dizziness from the poisoned champagne was receding, replaced by a cold clarity. I turned off the terminal and stepped out into the silent hallway. I was halfway to the stairwell when the silence was shattered. My cell phone vibrated violently, the ringtone echoing off the glass walls of the empty executive suites. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. The screen glared brightly in the dim light, displaying a name I had once spoken with pride. Bradley. I did not answer it. I simply stood there, watching the screen light up the darkness, listening to the phone demand attention. It rang until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it started ringing again. Then a third time. He was relentless. I could picture the scene perfectly. The grand ballroom, the guests whispering, and my son standing at the front desk, flushed with embarrassment, as the manager handed back a piece of useless plastic. On the fourth consecutive call, I swiped the screen to accept. I took a breath and let my shoulders slump, adopting the persona of the confused old man they wanted me to be. Hello? I mumbled, my voice intentionally raspy and weak. I let out a dry cough, moving the phone slightly away from my mouth for effect. Dad. Finally. Bradley's voice exploded through the speaker, frantic and dripping with rage. Where are you? The hotel manager just pulled me aside in front of the governor. The corporate card was declined. Every single corporate card was declined. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? His breathing was heavy, ragged. I could hear Monica's high-pitched voice in the background, throwing a tantrum near the coat check. I injected a perfect note of groggy disorientation into my response. Declined. What do you mean declined, Bradley? I am in bed. My stomach has been in knots since I left the party. I think I ate some bad shrimp. I feel terrible. Dad, focus. Bradley snapped, dropping any pretense of caring about my health. The bill for the banquet is $35,000. The hotel is threatening to lock the doors and call the police right now. My personal cards cannot cover this. The system is saying the corporate accounts are frozen. Did you do something? Did you call the bank? I let out a long, pathetic sigh. The bank. No, Bradley. Why would I call the bank? I have been throwing up for the last hour. You know how those security algorithms are. We spent a lot of money out of state last week for the new fleet tires. Maybe the algorithm flagged the hotel charge as fraudulent. I do not know how to fix it right now. I am so tired, son. My head is spinning. Do not do this to me, Dad. Bradley sounded like a panicked teenager, his polished executive facade completely crumbling. You have to call the fraud department. You have to authorize the charge. They are going to arrest me. Monica is crying. Everyone is staring at us. I leaned against the cool concrete wall of the stairwell, feeling a grim satisfaction. Let them stare, I thought. Let them see the real Bradley Callahan, a man who could not afford the suit he was wearing without his father's permission. I am sorry, Bradley, I said, making my voice tremble slightly. I just cannot look at a screen right now. The room is spinning. I took my blood pressure medication, and I just need to sleep. Call the bank yourself. You are the vice president. You have the authorization. I do not, Dad. That is what I am trying to tell you. They said my signature authority was revoked tonight. What is going on? His voice cracked on the last word. A sliver of genuine fear finally pierced through his arrogance. He was beginning to realize that he was standing on a trapdoor, and the lever had just been pulled. I do not know anything about that. I mumbled, slurring my words just a bit more. It must be a glitch. A terrible computer glitch. I will call the branch manager first thing on Monday morning. Monday. Dad. It is Friday night. You cannot leave me here until Monday. Bradley, my chest hurts, I whispered, playing my trump card. If you keep yelling at me, I am going to have to call an ambulance. I am hanging up now. I love you. Good luck with the manager. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear him screaming my name, begging me not to hang up, but I tapped the red button and cut him off. The silence of the hallway rushed back in, soothing and profound. I slipped the phone into my pocket and silenced it. I walked down the stairs and pushed through the exit doors into the night air. I walked around to the back of the lot to my personal vehicle. It was an old pickup truck that Bradley always begged me to sell. I climbed inside the worn seat conforming to my back. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. As I drove the dark, empty roads back toward my house, I knew my son. He would not wait for Monday. He would not even wait for morning. They were desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I pulled into my driveway, the house looming quietly in the shadows. I unlocked the front door, walked into the kitchen and started a pot of strong black coffee. There would be no sleep tonight. I sat at the kitchen table, staring directly at the locked front door. The wolves were coming for me. The grandfather clock chimed one heavy note. It was 1 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table holding a cold mug of coffee. The silence broke when I heard tires speeding up my gravel driveway, followed by slamming car doors. Footsteps pounded against the wooden porch. The heavy oak door shuddered under frantic knocking. Dad, open up. It is me, Bradley shouted. His voice was a mixture of panic and entitlement. I took a deep breath, let my shoulders slump, and forced my eyes to half close. I stood up, dragging my steps, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. Bradley pushed past me, bringing the scent of expensive cologne into my foyer. Monica followed, her face stained with ruined mascara, though her eyes were completely dry. She clutched her designer shawl like a shield. What is going on? I mumbled, leaning against the doorframe. Why are you here so late? I told you I was sick. Sick, Bradley scoffed, pacing my living room. His bespoke Italian suit was rumpled. You locked me out of the company accounts, Dad. The manager threatened to call the police. Do you have any idea what you did to our reputation? I watched him pace. The image of him overlapped with a memory from 30 years ago. I remembered the grueling double shifts I worked that winter, driving a rig through snowstorms with a broken heater just to afford that private college he wanted. I traded my health so he could wear that suit and shout at me. I rubbed my temples, playing the exhausted old man. The bank must have flagged the card. I was feeling dizzy. Lily gave me a piece of paper, and then I felt sick. Lily Monica practically spat the name. That little girl is completely out of control, Richard. She ruined the entire evening. She has an overactive imagination from watching too much television. She is always making up stories to get attention. Bradley stopped pacing. Dad, listen to me. That note Lily gave you was nothing. You misunderstood. It was just a draft for an estate tax strategy. A strategy? I repeated, letting my voice sound weak and confused. Yes, an estate tax strategy. Bradley insisted, speaking to me like a slow child. If something happens to you, the government will swoop in and take 40% of everything you built. The IRS will gut the company. We were setting up a trust. We were just trying to protect your money, Dad. To protect your legacy. He looked so earnest. It was a plausible lie constructed to prey on an old man's fear of losing his life's work to the government. If I had not felt the chemical burn of a sedative in my throat tonight, I might have actually believed him. I might have thanked him. But my gut instinct told me the truth. They were trying to gaslight me to make me doubt my own sanity and memory. And that note, Bradley continued in a fake, soothing tone. It was just notes from a call with the tax attorney. Transfer control of the retirement fund to a protected trust. Signatures required tonight meant starting the preliminary paperwork. Lily found it and completely misunderstood. You know how kids are. She probably thought it was a spy game. Monica chimed in with manufactured grief. And instead of talking to us, you ran away. You left us to face the governor and the most important investors in Ohio. We were humiliated, Richard. I had to beg the manager not to have us arrested. It was the most embarrassing night of my life. She buried her face in her hands, though she peeked through her fingers to check my reaction. Bile rose in my throat. My son was standing in the house I paid for, lying to my face. He was perfectly willing to throw his 9-year-old daughter under the bus, labeling her a liar just to save his skin. My urge to grab him by his fancy suit and throw him out into the street was overwhelming. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell them I knew exactly what was in the glass. But I swallowed my disgust, locking it away. If I confronted them now, Lily would be the one to suffer. They already controlled her, and if they thought I was a threat, they would isolate her completely. I had to protect my granddaughter. I had to play their game until I held all the cards. I let out a trembling sigh. I looked at the floor, shaking my head. An estate tax strategy, I whispered, making my voice crack. I am so sorry, Bradley. I did not understand. My head was spinning so badly at the party. I thought something terrible was happening. I am getting old, and my mind plays tricks on me when I am tired. I should have trusted you. Bradley exhaled a loud, dramatic breath of relief. It is okay, Dad. We know you are not yourself lately. That is why we are here to help you manage things. But you have to fix the bank issue in the morning. I will. I promised, looking up with apologetic eyes. I will call the bank first thing and tell them it was a mistake. Just please let me get some sleep now. I feel so weak. Bradley nodded, a smug smirk briefly flashing across his face before he hid it. Get some rest, Dad. We will talk tomorrow. He turned and walked toward the door, Monica following. They walked out into the night, convinced they had won. They thought they had manipulated the clueless old man. But as I locked the heavy oak door behind them, the trembling in my hands stopped entirely. They had just given me exactly what I needed. Time. I stood in the silent foyer and planned my next move. The heavy oak door was a barrier between me and the two people I had once considered my family. Through the narrow, frosted glass panels on the side of the door, I watched the red taillights of Bradley's luxury sedan illuminate the driveway. The red glow swept across the dark walls of my hallway as the car reversed and then sped off into the night. They were gone. For a moment, the sheer exhaustion of the evening threatened to pull me down to the hardwood floor. My 75-year-old bones ached, and the residual effects of whatever sedative they had slipped into my champagne still left a metallic taste on my tongue. But I could not afford to sleep. The stakes had been raised too high. I walked slowly into the kitchen, the only sound being the steady ticking of the wall clock. I poured the black coffee I had brewed earlier into a ceramic mug. The warmth of the ceramic grounded me. I took a slow sip, letting the bitter liquid clear the last of the fog from my brain. I reached into the top drawer of the kitchen island and pulled out my digital tablet. Bradley thought he knew everything about this house. He thought I was just a technologically illiterate old trucker who could barely operate a smartphone. He was absolutely wrong. A few months ago, I had noticed some expensive power tools missing from my garage, along with a few packages that had been marked as delivered on the front porch. Instead of calling the police and making a fuss, I called a buddy of mine who used to run security for the freight yards. He came over on a Sunday afternoon, while Bradley was out golfing, and installed a state-of-the-art microscopic camera directly into the wooden trim above the front porch. He also wired a high-definition audio receiver into the hanging planter near the welcome mat. I never mentioned it to Bradley or Monica. I just wanted to catch a local porch pirate. I never imagined I would be using it to spy on my own son. I unlocked the tablet and opened the security application. The screen illuminated my face with a harsh blue light. I navigated to the recorded footage, scrolling back to the exact minute I had locked the front door behind them. The video feed buffered for a second, before the crisp black and white infrared image appeared on the screen. There they were, Bradley and Monica standing on my front porch, perfectly illuminated in the darkness. The audio track crackled slightly as the sensitive microphone picked up the sound of the wind blowing through the pine trees in the front yard. Then I heard their voices. The second my front door clicked shut, the masks of the concerned son and the tearful daughter-in-law instantly melted away. Bradley's shoulders dropped, and he ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, ruining it. He looked completely furious. He kicked the wooden post of the porch railing with the toe of his expensive leather shoe. He muttered a string of curses under his breath, complaining that I was too stubborn to just sign the papers at the hotel. Monica did not look sad anymore. Her face was twisted into a cruel, impatient scowl. She reached out and grabbed Bradley's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of his suit jacket. She pulled him close, her voice a sharp, venomous hiss that the microphone captured with terrifying clarity. She told him to stop whining and listen to her. She said he did not sign the medical power of attorney. She repeated the words, emphasizing every single syllable. The medical power of attorney. She told Bradley that they were out of time. She demanded that he call the doctor first thing in the morning. She said the old man was getting suspicious, and if they waited until Monday, he might call his own lawyer. She told Bradley to get the doctor to finalize the evaluation tomorrow, no matter what it cost. Bradley nodded slowly in the black and white footage, his face pale and desperate. He told her he would make the call at dawn. They hurried down the steps and got into their car. The video ended freezing on the empty porch. I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, the coffee turning cold in my hand. The tablet slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the granite countertop. My breath caught in my throat. The conflict had just shifted violently beneath my feet. This was no longer just a pathetic attempt by a greedy son to embezzle company funds or seize my bank accounts. This was an orchestrated, malicious plot to steal my freedom. A medical power of attorney, calling the doctor to finalize an evaluation. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind, creating a picture so horrific it made my blood run cold. They were not waiting for me to die. They were planning to declare me mentally incompetent. They wanted to strip me of my legal rights, steal my autonomy, and lock me away in a facility where I could never interfere with their spending again. They had drugged me tonight to simulate a neurological episode. They wanted me to look confused and frail in front of the hotel guests to build their narrative. My own son was preparing to bury me alive in a nursing home. The profound sadness I felt earlier evaporated entirely. It was replaced by a hard, unyielding resolve. I was a man who had fought for every single inch of ground I stood on. I would not let them put me in a cage. Tomorrow morning, the real war would finally begin. I would show them exactly what happens when you corner an old trucker who has nothing left to lose. The sun crested the horizon, casting a pale gray light through the kitchen windows. I had not slept a single minute. I sat at the table watching the dawn break my mind, running through every possible scenario. I needed them to believe I was still the clueless, compliant old man they thought they left behind in the middle of the night. If Bradley woke up and found the corporate accounts still frozen, he would panic. Panic leads to unpredictable actions, and I needed him predictable. I needed him to think his little visit had worked. I walked over to the tablet sitting on the granite counter. I picked it up, opened the secure connection to the company server, and accessed the financial mainframe. I did not unlock the primary corporate accounts or restore his check signing authority. That would be giving him too much rope. Instead, I found a minor secondary credit card tied to a subsidiary account, one usually reserved for emergency travel expenses. I selected the card typed in my override code and hit unfreeze. It had a limit of $10,000, enough to let him pay off the angry hotel manager and buy them breakfast, but not enough to fund their hostile dépassement. It was a breadcrumb. It was a fake truce designed to buy me the 48 hours I desperately needed. With the bait set, I poured the stale coffee down the sink and picked up my cell phone. It was 8 in the morning. Bradley would be awake, probably sweating over the hotel bill. But I did not want to speak to him. I wanted to hear the one voice of innocence left in my family. I dialed their home number. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. "Hello," Monica answered, her voice clipped and guarded. "Good morning, Monica," I said, making sure my voice sounded suitably tired and apologetic. "How is Bradley doing? Is everything sorted out with the hotel?" I heard a sharp exhale on the other end of the line. "Yes, Richard. Bradley went to the bank an hour ago. He said one of the backup cards started working, so he is settling the bill now. It was a massive inconvenience, but it is handled. I am so relieved," I lied smoothly, leaning against the counter. "I feel terrible about last night. My stomach is still in knots, but my head is clear. I wanted to call and apologize to Lily. I feel awful that I had to run out on the birthday party she was so excited about. Can you put her on the phone for a minute?" The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and heavy. When Monica finally spoke, the artificial sweetness she usually reserved for me was completely gone. Her voice was pure ice. "No, Richard. You cannot speak to Lily." I frowned, my grip tightening on the phone. "Why not? Is she still asleep?" "She is not asleep," Monica snapped. "She is in her room and she is going to stay there. She is strictly grounded. Bradley and I had a long talk with her after we got home last night. Her behavior at your party was completely unacceptable." "What behavior?" I asked, forcing myself to sound merely confused rather than enraged. "She gave me a piece of paper. She was just playing a game." "It is not a game, Richard," Monica hissed, her tone venomous. "She is developing a severe lying problem. She stole a confidential document from her father's briefcase and made up a ridiculous story to scare you. We are not tolerating this kind of toxic behavior in our house. We have already contacted a child psychologist. She is going to start seeing a therapist this week to address her pathological need for attention and her lying. Until she understands the severity of what she did, she is not allowed to use the phone, watch television, or have any contact with anyone outside of this house. That includes you." My blood ran completely cold inside my chest. A professional child therapist for lying. They were going to drag a 9-year-old girl to a psychologist and brand her a liar, all to cover up their crimes. They were going to aggressively gaslight their own daughter, punish her, and isolate her simply because she had the tremendous courage to try and save her grandfather. They were locking her away to make sure she could not slip me any more information. "I understand she needs discipline, Monica," I said, fighting to keep the absolute fury out of my voice. "But a paid therapist. Do you not think that is incredibly extreme?" "We know what is best for our daughter, Richard," she replied very coldly. "You just focus on resting and getting your own mind right. We will handle the family discipline. And do not forget, Bradley made an appointment for you to see the doctor this afternoon. We need to make sure you are healthy." "I will see him," I promised, my voice hollow. "Goodbye, Monica." She hung up without another word. The loud dial tone echoed continuously in my ear. I lowered the phone, staring blankly at the kitchen wall. The reality of the situation crashed down on me with sickening weight. This was no longer just about protecting my company or saving my own skin from a fraudulent medical evaluation. Lily was in immediate danger. They were mentally abusing her, preparing to break her spirit, just to protect their dirty secrets. I had foolishly thought I had a few clear days to carefully build a legal defense. But hearing the cruelty in Monica's voice changed everything. The safe timeline was completely gone. I had to move faster. I had to strike hard, and I had to do it before they completely destroyed that brave little girl. I walked quickly to the hallway closet and pulled out my heavy winter coat. It was finally time to leave the house. I pulled on the canvas coat and grabbed my truck keys. The morning air was biting as I stepped off the porch, a stark contrast to the fire burning in my chest. I climbed into my old Ford, the engine roaring with a familiar rumble, and headed toward the east side of town. Monica claimed Lily was strictly grounded in her room, but I knew my daughter-in-law. She was obsessed with appearances. Keeping her child home on a Friday would raise questions with the carpool moms. She would never sacrifice her perfect suburban image. Lily would be at school. I was absolutely sure of it. The 20-minute drive felt like hours. My mind raced with the terrible things Monica had said. A child psychologist to cure lying. It was a vile tactic designed to break a little girl's spirit and make her doubt her reality. I gripped the steering wheel hard. I would burn my company to the ground before I let them do that to her. I arrived at Oak Creek Elementary just before morning recess. I did not park in the main lot where my truck would be easily recognized. Instead, I drove to the back of the property, pulling onto a dirt service road running alongside the playground. I cut the engine and rolled down the window. The yard was surrounded by a tall chain-link fence bordered by thick oak trees, providing perfect cover. I sat in the cold cab and waited. The silence was suddenly broken by the sharp sound of the school bell. Moments later, heavy metal doors swung open and a flood of children poured out onto the asphalt. The air filled with shouting and laughter. I scanned the chaotic sea of small faces, my eyes frantically searching for a familiar mop of dark curls. For an agonizing minute, I could not find her. Panic fluttered in my chest. What if Monica really kept her home? What if they already started their psychological warfare? Then the crowd shifted, and I saw her. She was not running toward the swings with the others. She was walking slowly along the far edge of the blacktop, her head down, shoulders slumped. She looked so small and incredibly isolated. My heart ached watching her. She kicked a loose pebble, completely ignoring the noisy games nearby. I knew that posture well. It was the weight of a secret too heavy for a child to carry. She wandered closer to the perimeter, moving toward the oak trees where I was hidden. I very quietly opened the truck door and stepped into the damp grass. I stayed low, using the tree trunks to shield myself from the two teachers patrolling the yard in yellow vests. I crept up to the fence, my boots making barely a sound. Lily was only 20 yards away, tracing the diamond patterns of the wire with her finger. I had to get her attention without drawing the eyes of the monitors. "Lily," I whispered, keeping my voice steady. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her head snapped up, her wad-sawhab eyes scanning the trees. "Lily, over here." "It is Grandpa," I called softly. She spotted me through the mesh. Her face instantly transformed from despair to a mix of sheer relief and absolute terror. She looked over her shoulder, checking the teachers. When she saw they were facing the other direction, she darted across the grass and pressed herself against the fence. "Grandpa," she breathed, her voice trembling. "You cannot be here. Mommy said if I talk to you, they will send me away to a special doctor." Tears welled up, spilling over her pale cheeks. I pushed my fingers through the chain link, and she reached up, pressing her tiny hands against mine through the cold metal. "Nobody is sending you anywhere, sweetheart," I promised, my voice fierce with conviction. "I am going to fix this. I am so sorry about last night. You were incredibly brave to give me that note." Lily sniffled, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her uniform sweater. They were so mad, Grandpa. Daddy was yelling and Mommy was throwing things. They said you were crazy, but I know you are not. Before they left this morning, Mommy was in her bathroom talking on the phone. She said the doctor was ready. She was so distracted she left her purse on the kitchen counter. Lily reached into the pocket of her uniform skirt. Her hand was shaking violently as she pulled something out and pushed it through one of the small diamond-shaped gaps in the fence. I cupped my hands to catch it. It was a pink, sparkly computer USB drive, the kind covered in cheap plastic rhinestones. Mommy has a secret folder on her computer, Lily whispered rapidly, her eyes darting back toward the teachers. She uses this pink drive to move the files. I saw her do it last week. I took it this morning before the bus came. Please look at it, Grandpa. Please do not let them take you away. A sharp whistle blew from across the yard. The teachers were signaling the end of recess. I have to go, she gasped. I clutched the sparkly pink plastic in my palm. I love you, Lily. Be brave for just a little longer. I am coming for you, I vowed. She gave me one last, terrified look and ran back toward the building, blending into the crowd of students. I stood by the fence, staring down at the drive in my hand. It looked like a child's toy, but I knew it was the weapon I needed to destroy them. I turned and walked back to my truck. The waiting was over. I slipped the small pink plastic drive deep into my coat pocket, feeling its sharp edges. I started the engine, my mind completely focused. The real battle for my family had finally just begun. I drove back to my house with my eyes locked on the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The small pink sparkly drive in my pocket felt heavier than a block of solid lead. Every time I hit a bump in the pavement, I could feel it shifting against my side, a constant reminder of the ticking clock hanging over my head. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house was completely still. I parked the truck in the garage and lowered the heavy metal door, making absolutely sure no one could see my vehicle from the street. I walked through the kitchen, ignoring the empty coffee mug sitting on the counter, and went straight into my private study. I locked the solid oak door behind me and closed the heavy velvet curtains, plunging the room into shadows before turning on the small brass desk lamp. I sat down in my leather chair and pulled my laptop from the bottom drawer of my desk. My heart was hammering against my ribs with a heavy rhythmic thumping that echoed in my ears. I pulled the child's toy out of my pocket. It was ridiculous looking, covered in cheap plastic rhinestones that caught the light of the lamp. But to me, it was the key to my survival. I opened the laptop, waited for the screen to brighten, and carefully inserted the drive into the side port. The computer chimed, and a small window popped up on the screen, displaying the contents of the drive. I took a deep, shaky breath, bracing myself for whatever legal traps my son had laid out. I fully expected to see complex tax documents, estate planning drafts, or perhaps a series of complicated corporate restructuring files designed to quietly push me out of the company I built. Instead, the screen was filled with dozens of disorganized folders. None of them said anything about taxes. I clicked on a folder labeled Urgent Financials. A massive spreadsheet opened up, filled with rows of red numbers. I leaned in, squinting at the screen, my mind struggling to process the sheer volume of the figures. They were account statements from an offshore cryptocurrency exchange, completely unregistered and highly volatile. The account was in Bradley's name. I scrolled down the columns, watching the negative balances grow larger and larger. He had not just lost a few $1,000s playing the market. He had leveraged himself to the absolute limit. The final deficit at the bottom of the page made my stomach turn completely upside down. It was a massive, crushing debt of over $4 million. My son was not just greedy, he was drowning. He had gambled away his life, and now he was trying to steal my entire company to cover his catastrophic losses before the people he owed came collecting. The financial ruin was devastating, but it was the next folder that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was sitting at the bottom of the list, simply labeled medical. My hand hovered over the mouse. I remembered Monica's cold, hissing voice on the porch recording talking about calling the doctor in the morning. I clicked the folder twice. Inside was a single document, a finalized PDF file bearing the official letterhead of a private psychiatric evaluation center located 3 towns over. I opened the file. The title at the top of the page was printed in bold black letters: Patient Assessment and Legal Competency Evaluation. Right below it was my name, Richard Callahan. I began to read the paragraphs below, and with every single word, a new wave of absolute horror washed over me. It was a completely fabricated medical history. The doctor, a man I had never met in my entire life, detailed extensive fictional interviews with me. He wrote that I suffered from severe paranoia, frequent hallucinations, and violent mood swings. He claimed I was a danger to myself and others, unable to manage my own basic needs or financial affairs. And then at the very bottom of the second page was the official medical conclusion, neatly typed and ready for a signature. Richard Callahan, severe dementia, legally incompetent. I stared at those words until they blurred together on the glowing screen. Severe dementia, legally incompetent. This was not just a plan to take my money. This was a meticulously crafted blueprint to erase me from society. With this document, Bradley could march into a courtroom, wave this fake evaluation in front of a judge, and strip away every single civil right I possessed. I would no longer be a citizen, a father, or a business owner. I would be a ward of the state, entirely under the control of the son who had orchestrated my downfall. They would lock me away in a secure facility, pump me full of the same chemical sedatives they slipped into my champagne, and let me rot in a bed while they liquidated my life to pay off a mountain of imaginary internet money. The sheer, calculated evil of their plan was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. They were willing to destroy my mind and steal my freedom just to maintain their luxurious lifestyle. I slowly closed the laptop, the screen going dark. The silence in the study was deafening. The sadness and betrayal that had weighed me down all morning vanished, completely burned away by a cold, hard fury. They thought I was just an old, tired man they could easily push aside. They forgot that I spent 40 years fighting for everything I have. I stood up from my chair and walked over to the window, looking out at the thick woods surrounding my property. I picked up the heavy receiver of the phone sitting on my mahogany desk. The time for playing the confused and weak victim was officially over. I knew exactly who I truly needed to call right now to begin the war. But before I brought my lawyer into this nightmare, I needed undeniable physical proof. I could not just walk into his office with a stolen pink computer drive and a wild accusation that my own son had poisoned me. Lawyers deal in cold, hard facts, and I needed the kind of evidence that no expensive defense attorney could ever wave away. I needed medical proof of exactly what had happened to me in that hotel ballroom. I stood up from my desk, leaving the laptop open and the heavy velvet curtains drawn shut. I walked back out to the garage and climbed into my truck for the second time that morning. I was not going to use any local doctors. Bradley knew too many people in Columbus, and the last thing I needed was a well-meaning physician making a phone call to my emergency contact. I had to go far outside their sphere of influence. I backed out of the driveway and turned onto the interstate, heading north toward a small, independent urgent care clinic 3 counties over. The drive took almost an hour and a half, giving me plenty of time to sit alone with my thoughts. The physical symptoms from the night before were mostly gone, but a dull, persistent ache throbbed at the base of my skull. I kept replaying that moment in my head over and over again. The toast, the clinking glasses, the crisp white shirt of the waiter handing me the champagne. Had Bradley bribed someone on the catering staff? Or had Monica simply slipped something into the glass while I was distracted by the cameras? It did not matter how they did it. What mattered was the absolute lack of hesitation in their eyes as they watched me drink it. They had smiled at me, toasted to my long life, and then waited for me to fall apart. I pulled into the paved parking lot of the rural health clinic just after noon. The waiting room was mostly empty, smelling strongly of industrial bleach and old magazines. I walked up to the sliding glass window and spoke to the receptionist. I paid entirely in cash, pulling crisp bills from my emergency wallet, so there would be absolutely no paper trail connected to my insurance provider or my credit cards. I gave them a fake name and a completely fabricated story. I told the attending physician that I was an old man who had accidentally mixed up his daily prescriptions with his late wife's leftover medications, and I just needed a comprehensive toxicology screening to make sure my liver and kidneys were not failing. The doctor, a young man who looked overworked and exhausted, bought the story without asking too many difficult questions. He led me into a small examination room, strapped a rubber tourniquet tightly around my upper arm, and drew 3 vials of dark red blood. I watched the blood flow into the plastic tubes, thinking about how that same blood ran in Bradley's veins. I had given him life and he was using it to try and end mine. The doctor told me the expedited lab results would take about 2 hours. I nodded, thanked him, and walked out to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat, staring out through the windshield at the gray, overcast sky. 2 hours felt like an absolute eternity. I listened to the radio, drank a bottle of lukewarm water, and mentally rehearsed the conversation I was going to have with my attorney. Every passing minute felt heavy, weighed down by the terrifying reality of what I was uncovering. Finally, my cheap burner phone rang. It was the clinic. The receptionist told me the doctor was ready to go over my lab results. I walked back into the sterile building, my boots echoing loudly against the linoleum floor. The young doctor was waiting for me in his small office. He held a printed sheet of paper in his hands, and his previously relaxed expression was now replaced by a look of deep medical concern. He asked me to sit down. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses and asked me again what exactly I thought I had swallowed last night. I played dumb, naming a few standard blood pressure pills. He shook his head slowly and slid the piece of paper across the desk toward me. He told me that my liver and kidneys were functioning perfectly fine for a man my age. However, the toxicology screen had picked up something entirely different. He pointed to a highlighted line of text near the bottom of the page. The test results showed a massive concentrated dose of a drug called lorazepam in my bloodstream. I stared at the word, my mind racing. I asked him what that was. The doctor explained that it was a highly potent benzodiazepine, a heavy sedative typically used in psychiatric wards to immediately calm violently manic patients or to induce deep sleep before severe medical procedures. He looked me dead in the eye and said that the dosage I had ingested was incredibly dangerous. For a man my age mixed with alcohol, it could have easily caused profound respiratory depression, complete memory loss, or even a fatal cardiac event. He asked if I had a prescription for severe anxiety. I told him no. He strongly advised me to contact the local police immediately, suspecting foul play. I thanked him, folded the medical report, and put it securely in my coat pocket. I promised him I would handle it. I walked out of the clinic and stepped into the cold afternoon air. I stood by my truck for a moment, letting the horrific reality settle into my bones. The physical proof was literally in my hands. My son and daughter-in-law had intentionally poisoned me. They had risked my actual life to simulate dementia. The sadness was completely gone now. It was time to call Jonathan Pierce. The drive from the rural clinic back into the heart of downtown Columbus took just over an hour. I did not bother calling ahead to make an appointment. When you have paid a man hundreds of thousands of dollars in retainer fees over the course of 4 decades, you do not wait in the lobby. Jonathan Pierce was not just a lawyer. He was a legal predator, a man forged in the cutthroat corporate battles of the 1980s. He was the one who helped me incorporate Callahan Freight when it was nothing more than 3 used trucks and a mountain of debt. He knew where all the bodies were buried because he had dug most of the graves himself. I parked my old truck in the underground garage of his sleek glass-fronted office building, completely ignoring the reserved signs for executive partners. I rode the private elevator up to the 40th floor, my heavy boots sinking into the thick, plush carpet of the reception area. The young receptionist tried to ask for my name, but I walked right past her oversized marble desk and pushed open the heavy oak doors to Jonathan's private corner office. He was sitting behind a massive desk cluttered with legal briefs, wearing a pristine navy pinstripe suit. He looked up, his sharp gray eyes narrowing behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He started to reprimand me for barging in, but the words died in his throat when he saw the expression on my face. I did not say a single word. I simply walked over to his desk, reached into my coat pocket, and dropped the folded toxicology report directly onto his leather blotter. Then I reached into my other pocket and placed the pink rhinestone-covered computer drive right next to it. Jonathan looked at the ridiculous piece of plastic, then back up at me with a raised eyebrow. I pulled up a heavy leather chair and sat down. I told him to read the paper first and then plug the drive into his computer. I sat in absolute silence as he unfolded the clinic report. I watched his eyes scan the lines of medical jargon, stopping dead when he reached the highlighted section about the lorazepam. He looked up, the color draining slightly from his face. He asked me if this was some kind of sick joke. I told him that I wished it was. Without another word, he picked up the pink drive and inserted it into his sleek silver laptop. I guided him to the folder labeled Urgent Financials. I watched his reflection in the window glass as he scrolled through the massive offshore cryptocurrency debts. A low, sharp whistle escaped his lips. Then I told him to open the folder marked Medical. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew thick and cold. Jonathan read the fabricated psychiatric evaluation, his jaw tightening with every paragraph. When he reached the bottom, where the fake doctor had declared me legally incompetent with severe dementia, he slowly closed the laptop. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. For a long time, the only sound in the office was the faint hum of the city traffic 40 floors below. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. He told me that this was not a simple case of corporate embezzlement. He said that my son had crossed a line into criminal conspiracy, attempted medical kidnapping, and severe fraud. Jonathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his eyes locked onto mine. He explained exactly what they were trying to do. He said that with this forged medical evaluation and assigned medical power of attorney, Bradley could bypass a standard court hearing entirely. He could have a private ambulance arrive at my house physically, restrain me under the guise of a medical emergency, and transport me to a locked psychiatric ward. Once I was inside, declared incompetent by a corrupt physician, I would lose access to my bank accounts, my company, and my own civil rights. I would not even be legally allowed to hire an attorney to fight my way out. They would sedate me until I actually did lose my mind, while they liquidated Callahan Freight to pay off that $4 million crypto debt. The brutal reality of his words hung in the air, heavier than anything I had ever felt. I asked him what we needed to do. I told him I wanted to drive over to Bradley's house, kick the front door off its hinges, and drag him out by the collar of his expensive suit. Jonathan slammed his hand down on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He told me I would do no such thing. He said that if I confronted them now, I would be playing right into their hands. They would use my anger as proof of my supposed mental instability. They would call the police, show them the fake medical file, and say I was having a violent psychotic break. I would be handing them the exact excuse they needed to lock me away. If we were going to survive this, he said we had to be infinitely smarter and significantly more ruthless than they were. He ordered me to go back home and play the exact part they had written for me. I had to be the confused, sick, exhausted old man. I had to let them think their poison had worked. I had to agree to whatever minor requests they made, keeping them completely comfortable and completely blind to the fact that a trap was being built beneath their feet. He promised me that while I played the victim, he would unleash hell. He was going to initiate a shadow investigation completely off the books, utilizing every connection he had cultivated over his 40-year career. He told me to go home, lock my doors, and wait for his signal. I looked at the old vicious lawyer sitting across from me, and I felt the first real spark of hope since this nightmare began. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and gave him a single hard nod. I left the office ready to play my part. I drove back to my empty house with a strange sense of calm. For the first time since my granddaughter whispered her terrifying warning, I was no longer stumbling in the dark. I had a direction. I had a plan. And most importantly, I had a predator on my side. True to my word, I spent the rest of the weekend playing the pathetic role my son had cast me in. When Bradley called on Saturday morning to check on me, sounding tense and impatient, I kept my voice weak and trembling. I told him my memory was a little foggy and that I was spending most of my time resting in my armchair. I agreed to whatever minor suggestions he made, promising to sign any administrative paperwork he needed next week. I could practically hear the relief exhaling from his lungs over the phone. He genuinely believed his trap was closing flawlessly around my neck. He had absolutely no idea that Jonathan Pierce had already slipped the leash and unleashed a phantom into his meticulously constructed world. While I sat in my quiet living room staring blankly at the television, Jonathan's team was systematically tearing apart the digital foundations of Callahan Freight. He had called in a forensic accountant, a man he referred to as a ghost auditor. This was not a standard financial review. This was a silent, deep web penetration into the corporate mainframe. The ghost auditor did not knock on the front door of our accounting department. He slipped through the back channels using the master access codes I had provided. For 48 hours straight, this invisible investigator combed through every single ledger, every hidden offshore wire transfer, and every deleted invoice spanning the last 36 months. He bypassed the sanitized surface reports that Bradley presented to the board of directors and dug straight down into the raw, unfiltered data of the company. Late Sunday evening, the burner phone buzzed on my kitchen counter. I answered it immediately. It was Jonathan, and his voice lacked any of its usual sharp sarcasm. He sounded deadly serious. He told me to sit down. I pulled a wooden stool out from the kitchen island and braced myself. I thought the worst had already been revealed with the massive cryptocurrency debt and the forged psychiatric evaluation. I was wrong. The financial rot ran much deeper, and it was infinitely more sinister than a simple gambling addiction. Jonathan explained the findings of the ghost audit. Bradley had not just been siphoning corporate profits or abusing his executive expense accounts to cover his massive losses. He had been stealing directly from the employee pension fund. My breath caught in my throat. The pension fund was sacred. It was the collective life savings of the men and women who drove the trucks, loaded the docks, and managed the logistics day and night. People who had trusted me with their futures. The ghost auditor had uncovered a sophisticated network of dummy vendor accounts. For the past 2 years, Bradley had been quietly skimming percentages off the top of the monthly pension contributions. He created fake invoices for phantom maintenance services, routing the cash directly into his offshore cryptocurrency wallets to cover his staggering losses. He was gambling with the retirement money of single mothers in the dispatch office and mechanics with bad backs in the garage. He had stolen over $2 million from the very people who kept his lavish lifestyle afloat. My vision blurred with a rage so profound, it actually made my hands shake. I had built Callahan Freight on the promise of loyalty. If you worked hard for me, I made sure you and your family were taken care of. My son was not just destroying my legacy. He was actively ruining the lives of innocent working-class families to save his own skin. Jonathan did not let me sit in silence for long. He delivered the final crushing blow. The annual independent audit of Callahan Freight was scheduled to take place on the 15th of next month. The ghost auditor confirmed that the missing pension funds were blatantly obvious in the raw data. The official auditors would find the discrepancy within their first hour. When that happened, it would not just be an internal corporate scandal. Embezzling from an employee pension fund is a severe federal offense. The moment the auditors flagged the money, the authorities would be notified, and Bradley would be facing a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison. Suddenly, the entire timeline of their plot made perfect sense. This was never just about greed or securing an early inheritance. This was about sheer, desperate survival. Bradley was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. If I remained in charge of the company during the audit, the truth would come out, and I would hand him over to the police myself. He knew that. He knew I would never cover up the theft of my employees' life savings. His only way out was to eliminate me before the 15th of next month. If he used that forged medical evaluation to declare me incompetent, he could seize total control of the company. With absolute executive power, he could cancel the annual audit, liquidate massive corporate assets, quietly replace the missing pension money, to hide his tracks and sell off the rest of the company. He was planning to burn my entire world to the ground just to hide his crimes. I thanked Jonathan Pierce and hung up the phone. The large, empty house was completely silent, but the heavy war drums were beating loudly in my old ears. My son was a desperate, cornered animal willing to drug his father and steal from his employees to avoid a prison cell. He thought he was running out the clock on a helpless old man. He did not realize that I had just locked the heavy steel doors to the slaughterhouse, and I held the only key. The engine of my old Ford truck rumbled a deep, steady rhythm as I navigated the winding roads leading away from the city. The dense, manicured suburbs slowly gave way to barren fields and thick, untamed stretches of forest. The gray, overcast sky pressed down heavily on the landscape, draining the color from the trees and the dying winter grass. I drove in complete silence, the radio turned off, listening only to the wind whistling against the windshield. Every single mile I traveled further away from Columbus felt like a physical descent into absolute isolation. This was exactly what Bradley was counting on. He needed me out of sight, out of mind, and far away from anyone who might hear me call for help. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, my calloused hands feeling the worn leather under my palms. 40 miles outside the city limits. That was the exact distance my son had calculated it would take to completely erase my existence from the world. I watched the mileage marker signs tick by on the side of the highway, each one feeling like a heavy nail being driven into a coffin. The scenery grew increasingly bleak, devoid of any other vehicles or signs of life. It was a desolate stretch of forgotten highway, deliberately chosen for its remoteness. After nearly an hour of driving, my GPS directed me to turn onto a narrow, unmarked asphalt road, cutting deep into a dense patch of tall pine trees. I slowed the truck down, the heavy tires crunching loudly over loose gravel and fallen branches. The dark trees finally broke, revealing a massive clearing surrounded by a tall, heavy iron fence topped with coils of gleaming razor wire. There it was, the Serenity Pines Behavioral Institute. I pulled my truck onto a small dirt shoulder across the 2-lane highway, cut the engine, and just stared through the windshield. The name painted on the modest wooden sign near the entrance was a grotesque, mocking lie. There was absolutely nothing serene about the imposing, brutalist concrete structure sitting in the middle of the desolate clearing. It looked exactly like a forgotten military bunker designed to withstand a siege. The bleak building had 3 distinct stories, but the windows were unnaturally narrow, completely barred, and entirely frosted over with thick, reinforced security glass. There were no elderly patients walking the manicured lawns. There were no peaceful wooden benches or flower gardens to be seen. The only people visible outside were 2 large security guards, wearing black tactical vests, pacing back and forth near the heavily barricaded front gate. A solid white transport van with heavily tinted windows was parked idling near a secure side entrance. I watched a metal roll-up door electronically open, swallowing the large van whole before immediately slamming shut again. This was clearly not a hospital meant for healing. This was a processing center for the discarded. I rolled down my window, letting the biting chill of the afternoon air hit my face. I needed to physically feel the cold to make absolutely sure I was not simply having a terrible nightmare. I imagined the heavy metal doors of that cold facility forcefully closing behind my back. I vividly pictured myself being physically dragged down a dark fluorescent lit hallway by strange men in medical scrubs, desperately screaming that I was Richard Callahan, begging them to just call my lawyer. I imagined the sudden sharp prick of a needle sliding into my arm, the slow, terrifying numbness creeping into my brain, the chemical fog permanently erasing my precious memories of my late wife Martha, of my successful company, and of sweet little Lily. I would be locked alone in a tiny padded room right now, staring blankly at a white wall, while Bradley confidently signed the legal papers to liquidate my entire life. I had spent 4 grueling decades building a massive corporate legacy so that my family would never have to experience the bitter, humiliating taste of poverty. I gave my only son every single advantage, every educational opportunity, and every ounce of my paternal love and support. And his ultimate gratitude was a calculated master plan to drug me into a permanent vegetative state and casually throw me into this concrete tomb, all just to successfully cover up his own pathetic thievery. As I sat there quietly looking at the shining razor wire, the very last shred of paternal forgiveness inside my heart withered and completely died. The heavy sadness that had been brutally weighing down my chest for the past 4 days instantly evaporated into the freezing winter air. The profound, paralyzing grief of losing a son was entirely replaced by the cold, calculating clarity of a seasoned survivor. Bradley had made a massive, fatal miscalculation. He looked at my thinning gray hair and arrogantly assumed I was a soft, exhausted old man who would quietly surrender to the encroaching shadows. He entirely forgot that long before I was a wealthy executive in a tailored suit, I was a hungry, desperate street fighter who survived terrible blizzards, violent union strikes, and ruthless corporate sharks. I reached out and turned the key in the ignition. The old engine roared back to life, loud and intensely defiant, against the bleak, oppressive silence of the psychiatric asylum. I aggressively shifted the heavy truck into gear and pulled it back onto the paved road, leaving the absolute nightmare of Serenity Pines quickly shrinking in my rearview mirror. I was absolutely not going to be a helpless victim waiting for the slaughter. I was going to be the meticulous architect of his absolute legal and financial destruction. I pressed my heavy boot down hard on the gas pedal, accelerating rapidly back toward the distant city limits. It was now finally time to return to Jonathan Pierce. It was time to build a cage that he could never escape from, a permanent cell for my only son. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to Jonathan Pierce's office. The receptionist watched with wide eyes as I marched straight past her marble desk, my work boots thudding against the thick carpet. Jonathan was on the phone, but the moment he saw my face, he hung up the receiver. He did not ask where I had been. He simply leaned back in his leather chair, waiting for me to speak. I walked over to the glass window, looking out over the city skyline. I told him I had just taken a long drive out to the Serenity Pines Behavioral Institute. I described the high iron fences, the razor wire, and the heavy concrete walls. I told him exactly what it felt like to look at the place where my only son intended to bury me alive. Jonathan remained perfectly quiet. I turned away from the window and walked over to his desk. I placed both hands flat on the polished wood. I told him I was done playing defense. I was finished hiding in my own house, waiting for the trap to snap shut. I wanted to systematically dismantle Bradley's entire world. I wanted to strip him of everything he thought he was entitled to, and I wanted to make absolutely sure he could never touch a dime of my money again. Jonathan smiled. It was the sharp, predatory grin of a corporate lawyer who had just been given the green light to go to absolute war. He pulled out a thick stack of legal paper. He told me we were going to build an impenetrable fortress around my wealth. He called it an irrevocable trust. A standard trust could be changed or dissolved by the Creator. But an irrevocable trust was entirely different. Once the ink dried on the signature line, the terms were permanently locked in stone. The assets placed inside would immediately cease to be my legal property. They would belong entirely to the trust itself, managed by an independent fiduciary board. I would not be able to change my mind tomorrow. I could not dissolve it next year. I would be legally relinquishing all personal ownership of my life's work forever. I told him to draw it up immediately. I sat down in the leather chair and watched as he typed on his laptop, filling in the legal boilerplate. We started with the physical assets. I transferred the deed to my sprawling estate, the house where Bradley grew up, directly into the trust. Then we moved on to the financial accounts. Every single personal savings account, my private stock portfolios, and my emergency cash reserves were completely drained and redirected into the newly formed entity. Finally, we tackled the crown jewel of my empire. I officially signed over 100% of my controlling shares in Callahan Freight, the company I built with my bare hands. The company my son was desperately trying to steal was completely removed from the board. By the time Jonathan finished drafting the transfer documents, I was entirely penniless on paper. If Bradley succeeded in his horrific plan to have me declared mentally incompetent tomorrow, he would win absolute control over a man who literally owned nothing. There would be no sprawling estate to sell. There would be no massive corporate bank accounts to drain. He would inherit nothing but the lint in my pockets. The entire financial motivation for his wicked conspiracy was instantly vaporized. Jonathan paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He said we needed to designate a sole beneficiary for the trust. We needed to name the person who would inherit the massive fortune currently locked away. I did not even have to think about it. I told him the name. Lily Callahan, my brave 9-year-old granddaughter who had risked everything to warn me. Jonathan typed her name into the document. We established ironclad stipulations. Lily would not be able to access a single penny until she turned 21 years old. Furthermore, we explicitly wrote into the legal framework that neither Bradley nor Monica could ever act as financial guardians over the money. They were permanently barred from managing it. Jonathan printed the stack of documents. The printer hummed loudly, spitting out page after page of dense legal jargon. He arranged the papers on his desk, placing a heavy brass pen right in the center. He looked at me one last time, his gray eyes completely serious. He warned me that once I signed these pages, there was absolutely no turning back. I was giving away my entire empire. I picked up the heavy brass pen. It felt cold and solid in my hand. I thought about the forged medical evaluation. I thought about the razor wire at Serenity Pines. I thought about the stolen employee pension funds. And most importantly, I thought about Lily handing me that pink plastic drive through the chain-link fence of her schoolyard. I leaned over the desk and signed my name. I signed every single page with a steady, forceful hand. I did not feel a single ounce of regret or hesitation. With every stroke of the pen, I felt a massive weight lifting off my tired shoulders. I was no longer a wealthy target. I was a ghost. I had successfully disarmed my son. But protecting my money did not punish Bradley for the terrible crimes he had committed. It did not hold him accountable for drugging me, for plotting to kidnap me, or for embezzling millions from hardworking people. I put the pen down and looked across the desk at my lawyer. I told Jonathan that the shield was firmly in place. Now it was time to forge the sword. He nodded in silent agreement, reaching into his heavy bottom drawer to pull out a fresh legal pad. The defensive phase of our operation was officially over. We were going on the offensive, and we were going to be absolutely ruthless about it. Jonathan did not reach for his office phone. Instead, he pulled out an encrypted satellite phone, the kind reserved for government contractors. He punched in numbers, spoke briefly, and hung up. He looked at me and said they were on their way. I sat there watching the minute hand on the wall clock tick away, feeling the immense gravity of what we were about to initiate. Less than 45 minutes later, the heavy oak doors opened. 2 men walked in. They did not wear tailored designer suits. They wore plain, dark gray suits, and their rigid postures radiated unyielding authority. Jonathan introduced them as Special Agent Miller and Special Agent Vance from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. They did not smile. Their calculating eyes assessed me as a potential crime scene rather than a wealthy businessman. They sat in the leather chairs perfectly straight, waiting for the briefing. Jonathan wasted no time. He pushed the thick stack of financial documents across the mahogany wood. He started with the devastating results of the ghost audit. He systematically walked the agents through the tangled web of dummy vendor accounts, phantom invoices, and the illegal siphoning of the employee pension funds. He laid out the offshore cryptocurrency statements, drawing a direct line between the stolen retirement money and Bradley's gambling losses. Agent Miller flipped through the pages, his face impassive, his eyes moving rapidly. Agent Vance took meticulous notes on a small pad. They were seasoned professionals unfazed by corporate greed. Embezzlement was their daily bread and butter. Miller looked up and stated that while the financial theft was significant, corporate fraud cases often took months to prosecute. He told Jonathan that unless there was an immediate flight risk, standard procedure required a lengthy grand jury process before any federal arrests could be made. That was when I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the toxicology report and placed it next to the audits. Then I placed the pink rhinestone-covered computer drive beside it. I told the agents my son was not just stealing money. I told them he intentionally poisoned me at a public event 3 nights ago. I instructed Jonathan to show them the medical folder. Jonathan opened his laptop, turning the screen so the agents could see the forged psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Aris. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The mild, bureaucratic detachment vanished. Agent Vance stopped writing. Agent Miller leaned forward, staring intently at the glowing screen. He read the fraudulent diagnosis of severe dementia and the urgent recommendation for immediate involuntary commitment to the Serenity Pines Behavioral Institute. The agents exchanged a deeply serious glance. I explained the entire horrifying plot. I told them how Bradley and Monica planned to use this fake document to secure a medical power of attorney, legally strip my civil rights, and lock me inside a maximum security chemical prison. I told them about the hidden porch camera recording where Monica furiously demanded that Bradley call the corrupt doctor to finalize the trap. I made it clear that if they waited months for a grand jury, I would be heavily sedated in a padded room and the pension money would be gone. The room was deathly quiet. Agent Miller picked up the toxicology report and studied the dangerously high levels of lorazepam found in my blood. He finally looked at me, his cold eyes softening a fraction. He said attempted medical kidnapping combined with wire fraud and poisoning a senior citizen rapidly escalated this into a massive federal conspiracy. Miller stated they had enough solid evidence to raid Bradley's office and probably secure a basic indictment for financial crimes. But if I wanted to guarantee that my son and his wife spent the next 30 years in a federal penitentiary without any chance of a lenient plea deal, they needed something much more concrete. They needed to catch Bradley and the corrupt doctor actively attempting the medical kidnapping. They needed to execute a flawless sting operation. Agent Vance explained the harsh reality of the legal system. He said expensive defense attorneys could argue the medical evaluation was a preliminary consultation or the crypto debts were administrative mistakes. To absolutely bury them permanently, the FBI needed Bradley to physically walk into my house, present the forged documents, and actively attempt to force me out the door against my will. They needed me to be the bait. They wanted me to invite the wolves directly into my living room. They would wire my house with hidden cameras and audio recording devices. A heavily armed tactical team would be stationed completely out of sight, waiting for the exact moment Bradley crossed the legal line of no return. It was an incredibly dangerous proposition. If the tactical team was even a few seconds late, I could easily be injected with another massive dose of chemical sedatives and physically dragged out of my own home. Jonathan looked deeply concerned, and started to verbally object, citing the extreme physical risk to my health. But I held up my hand, silencing my lawyer completely. I looked directly into Agent Miller's eyes. I knew the stakes were astronomical, but this was the only way to protect the innocent people who relied on me. This was the definitive end of my family as I knew it, but I was completely ready to face the absolute worst. I thought about the hardworking men and women who drove my trucks. I thought about my terrified granddaughter, bravely waiting for me to save her. I did not feel a single ounce of fear. I felt an overwhelming sense of absolute purpose. I told the federal agents that I would do it. I told them to get their tactical gear ready because I was going to hand them my son on a silver platter. Let us finish this today. The FBI agents stood up, nodding in firm agreement. They began packing their briefcases, coordinating tactical logistics over encrypted devices. But as they turned to leave the office, I raised my hand and told them to stop. I told them the sting operation had to wait. Agent Miller frowned, his professional demeanor slipping slightly, as he reminded me that every passing hour gave my son an opportunity to execute his medical kidnapping plot. I looked at the federal agent and told him I understood the risks, but there was a massive vulnerability in our plan. If Bradley and Monica were arrested in my living room tonight, their house would become a chaotic crime scene. Monica was unpredictable, vindictive, and deeply unstable. If she sensed the walls closing in before the handcuffs clicked shut, she might try to flee the state, and she would undoubtedly drag my granddaughter right along with her. Lily was the brave one who had risked absolutely everything to warn me. She stole that pink flash drive. I was absolutely not going to let her become collateral damage in a federal raid. I turned to Jonathan and told him I needed full legal custody of Lily, and I needed it right now before the trap was officially set in motion. Jonathan ran a hand over his tired face, understanding the extreme legal difficulty of what I asked. He explained that stripping parental rights, even temporarily, was one of the most difficult legal maneuvers to execute in family court. Judges were inherently biased toward keeping children with their biological parents. But then he looked down at the toxicology report, resting on his mahogany desk. He picked up the piece of paper, a dangerous spark reigniting in his gray eyes. He said that an emergency ex parte motion might actually work. An ex parte hearing is a specialized legal proceeding conducted in front of a judge without the opposing party present, reserved strictly for situations involving imminent physical harm or extreme danger to a child. Jonathan immediately called his paralegal team into the room. For the next 2 hours, the law firm operated like a military war room. They drafted a mountain of urgent legal affidavits. We attached the verified toxicology report, proving my son and daughter-in-law had intentionally poisoned me. We included transcripts of the porch recording, where Monica aggressively demanded a fraudulent medical evaluation. We documented the severe psychological abuse they were inflicting on Lily, punishing her for telling the truth. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jonathan and I were briskly walking up the marble steps of the county courthouse. We bypassed the crowded public courtrooms and were escorted directly back to the private chambers of a senior family court judge. Judge Harrison was a stern woman with decades of experience dealing with dark domestic disputes. She sat quietly behind her heavy wooden desk, peering at us over her reading glasses as she opened the thick binder Jonathan placed in front of her. The room was perfectly silent, save for the sound of pages turning. I sat in the stiff wooden chair, my heart hammering a heavy rhythm against my ribs. I watched her eyes widen slightly as she read the clinical breakdown of the lorazepam dosage found in my blood. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable, and asked me to verbally confirm the events of the birthday party. I spoke with absolute clarity. I told her exactly how Lily had warned me how the champagne had burned my throat, and how my son had stood there smiling while I stumbled toward the door. I told her about the horrific chemical prison they had selected for me. Judge Harrison closed the binder and folded her hands together. She stated that the allegations were profoundly disturbing, but taking a child from her parents required an airtight justification. Jonathan stepped forward, pulling out his ultimate trump card. He informed the judge that the FBI Financial Crimes Division was actively preparing to execute a high-risk sting operation at my residence this evening. He explained that Bradley Callahan was facing imminent federal indictment for massive corporate embezzlement and conspiracy. If Lily remained in the custody of her parents, she would be in the direct line of fire of a major federal arrest, leaving her in the care of a mother who was an active co-conspirator in a poisoning plot. The judge absorbed this information, the gravity of the situation completely changing her posture. She picked up her pen and began to sign the emergency orders. She granted me immediate temporary physical and legal custody of Lily Callahan, citing severe imminent danger to the minor child. She also signed a strict restraining order barring Monica and Bradley from coming within 500 feet of Lily once the extraction was complete. Jonathan handed me the stamped, certified court order. The heavy paper felt like a shield forged from solid steel. We left the courthouse and contacted the local authorities. I was not going to let Child Protective Services pick up my granddaughter in a sterile white van. We coordinated with a plainclothes police officer and a specialized child advocate who agreed to discreetly remove Lily from her elementary school right before the final dismissal bell rang. They were instructed to bring her directly to Jonathan Pierce's secure office, where she would be kept safe, entertained, and completely shielded from the explosive violence about to shatter her parents' lives. Knowing that Lily was finally out of their toxic grasp lifted the heaviest burden from my soul. I drove back to my quiet, empty house alone. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the living room floor. The federal agents had already come and gone silently, wiring the room with hidden cameras and microscopic microphones. I sat down in my favorite armchair, feeling the cold, hard reality of what was coming. I picked up my phone. It was finally time to bait the trap. I sat in the deep leather of my favorite armchair, staring at the blank screen of my cell phone. The sun had completely set now, leaving the living room bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. To anyone looking through the windows, I was just a lonely old man sitting in the dark. But I knew the actual truth. Hidden deeply inside the binding of the books on my shelves, tucked behind the air vents and securely wired into the base of the table lamps, were microscopic lenses and highly sensitive microphones. The federal agents were currently watching and listening from an unmarked surveillance van parked 3 blocks away. Everything I said from this moment forward was on the official government record. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the oxygen fill my lungs and calm the steady pounding of my heavy heart. This was it. This was the moment I actively invited the devil through my front door. It was the hardest phone call of my entire life, not because I was afraid of my son, but because I knew that once he answered, the Bradley I raised was dead. I unlocked the phone screen and pressed his name. The dialing tone echoed softly in the quiet room. I closed my eyes and completely shifted my physical posture. I let my shoulders slump forward physically, mimicking the heavy weight of an exhausted, failing body. I intentionally slowed my breathing until it sounded incredibly ragged and shallow. I absolutely had to deliver the performance of a lifetime today. The phone rang twice, 3 times, and then the line clicked open. Dad Bradley's voice came through the speaker. He sounded annoyed, distracted, like I was interrupting his busy evening. "Are you okay? I thought you were just resting today." I did not answer him immediately. I let out a long, trembling groan, moving the phone slightly away from my mouth so it sounded like I was physically struggling to hold it. "Bradley," I whispered. My voice was intentionally slurred, the syllables running together like wet paint. "Bradley, are you there? I really need you. Please tell me you are there." The annoyance in his voice vanished entirely, instantly replaced by a sharp, calculating alertness. "Dad." "Yes, I am here. What is wrong with you? You sound absolutely terrible right now." I forced a cough. "I do not know," I stammered, injecting absolute panic into my vocal tone. "I woke up from my nap, and everything is wrong. The room is spinning, Bradley. It will not stop spinning. And my eyes. I rubbed my forehead with my free hand even though he could not actually see me. Everything is blurry. I can barely see the phone screen. The edges of the room are completely dark. I am so terribly confused. I could hear the subtle shift in his breathing on the other end of the line. It was the sound of a predator smelling fresh blood. "Did you take your medication?" he asked, his voice adopting that fake, soothing cadence he always used when he was trying to manipulate me. "Do you need me to call an ambulance?" "No," I cried out, my voice cracking perfectly. "No hospitals. I hate hospitals. I just need you. Bradley, something is very wrong with my brain. I cannot remember things." I walked into the study to look at the estate papers we talked about last night, the ones to protect the company from the taxes. But my mind just went completely blank. "Estate papers," he repeated softly. The sheer eagerness in his voice was sickening. He was completely taking the bait. "Yes," I mumbled, slurring heavily again. "The trust documents. And the safe. Bradley, the wall safe behind my desk. I really need to open it, but I cannot remember the combination. I have been trying for over an hour. All the emergency cash reserves and the bearer bonds are in there. I need to make sure everything is in order, but the numbers are entirely gone from my head. It is like someone completely erased my memory. I am so scared, son. I feel lost." The mention of the wall safe and the emergency cash was the clincher. Bradley had been desperately searching for a way to quickly cover his cryptocurrency debts. The promise of untraceable physical assets sitting behind a locked steel door in a house occupied by a confused old man was a temptation he could never resist, especially not when he fully believed I was rapidly deteriorating exactly as he and his corrupt doctor had planned. "Listen to me, Dad," Bradley said, his voice suddenly authoritative and incredibly urgent. "Do not touch anything else inside the dark room. Do not try to open the safe again. You might trigger the lock mechanism. Just sit down in your chair and stay exactly where you are. But we have to finalize the papers." I pleaded, sounding desperate and frail. "We have to do it tonight. If I go to sleep, I am terrified I will wake up tomorrow and not know my own name. I need to sign the power of attorney. I need you to take control of everything before my mind goes completely dark. Please, Bradley. Come over now. Bring Monica. Bring whoever you really need to help." "I am leaving right now," Bradley promised. His tone was tight with heavily suppressed excitement. "Monica and I are on our way. We are bringing the doctor with us, Dad. Just to make sure you are physically stable while we do the paperwork. Do you understand? The doctor is going to give you something to help you relax, okay?" I whimpered softly. "Just please hurry." "I will be there in 20 minutes, he said, and the line went dead. I lowered the phone. My shoulders squared. The bait was set, and the sharks were swimming straight into my metal cage. I remained seated in my leather armchair, the darkness of the living room pressing in around me. I focused on my breathing, physically, preparing myself to play the helpless victim one last time. Soon after I hung up the phone, the gravel in my driveway crunched under the weight of heavy tires. I heard the low, stealthy hum of a large commercial transport van. The ambulance was here. Footsteps immediately pounded up the wooden steps of my front porch. The lock on the heavy oak door clicked loudly as Bradley used his spare key. The door swung open, letting a harsh gust of cold winter air into the foyer, followed by 3 people entering my home. Dad, Bradley called out. "We are here." "Where are you?" I let out a weak, pathetic groan. "I am in the living room," I murmured, making sure my words sounded disoriented. "Please hurry." The room is spinning so fast. Someone flicked the main light switch, flooding the dim room with blinding brightness. I squinted, raising a trembling hand to shield my eyes. When my vision adjusted, I saw the 3 of them standing over me. Bradley stood in the center, his face flushed with a mixture of nervous sweat and greedy anticipation. To his left stood Monica, tightly clutching her designer handbag, her eyes darting nervously. And to his right was a man I recognized from the FBI briefing files. Dr. Victor Eris. He wore a dark wool coat over medical scrubs holding a black leather medical bag. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "Hello, Richard." Dr. Eris said, his voice entirely devoid of genuine empathy. "I am Dr. Eris. Bradley told me you were experiencing some severe neurological confusion tonight." "Who are you?" I stammered, shrinking back into the chair. "Bradley, I said no hospitals. I just need help with the safe. My memory is completely gone. I cannot remember the combination." Dr. Eris did not wait for an answer. He calmly set his black leather bag down on the coffee table right in front of my knees. He unzipped the main compartment and reached inside. When his hand emerged, my stomach violently churned. He was holding a pre-filled plastic syringe. The clear liquid inside caught the harsh glare of the overhead light. I knew exactly what it was. It was another massive, debilitating dose of lorazepam, probably mixed with something even stronger. He was fully prepared to inject me right here. "It is quite all right, Richard," Dr. Eris said smoothly, flicking the side of the syringe. "This is just a mild sedative. It will stop the room from spinning. It will calm your nerves so you can focus on the documents. Just hold out your arm for me." I pressed myself flat against the chair, shaking my head frantically. "No," I whimpered, making my voice crack with panic. "I do not want a shot. Bradley, please tell him to put that away. I just need to sign the estate papers." That was when Monica completely dropped her act. The fake sweet daughter-in-law persona she had meticulously maintained for years vanished in an instant. A cruel, triumphant sneer spread across her face. She stepped forward, standing so close I could smell the overpowering scent of her perfume. She looked down at me with absolute, undisguised contempt. "Oh, stop your pathetic, whining old man," Monica hissed, her voice dripping with pure venom. "There are no estate papers. There is no tax strategy. We do not need your stupid safe combination. We already have everything we need to take control." "Monica, what are you talking about?" I rasped. "I am talking about the fact that your time is officially up," she sneered. "You are done, Richard. You are a broken, useless old man who cannot even remember his own name. Did you really think we were going to sit around and wait for you to die naturally? You embarrassed me at the party. Do you hear that engine idling out back? That is a secure ambulance. It is waiting to take you to your new home. It is a very quiet place where you will not bother anyone ever again." She was relishing the opportunity to verbally torture the man who had funded her luxurious lifestyle. She wanted me to feel absolute despair before the doctor pushed that needle into my veins. I turned my desperate gaze toward my son. "Bradley," I pleaded, letting a genuine tear roll down my cheek. "Are you really going to let her speak to me like this? I built everything for you. Please, son." Bradley refused to meet my eyes. He looked down at the floor, a muscle twitching nervously in his cheek. He was a coward right down to his core. He reached into the pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick clipboard. He stepped forward, pushing Monica slightly out of the way. He held the clipboard out toward me. "Just sign the paper," Dad Bradley muttered, his voice strained. "It is a medical power of attorney. Dr. Eris has already certified that you are legally incompetent to manage your own affairs. If you sign this right now, we can do this the easy way. You go quietly, get in the van, and they will take good care of you. If you fight us, the doctor will use that syringe and the orderlies will physically carry you out of here in restraints. Do not make this harder than it has to be." He forcefully shoved the heavy clipboard onto my lap. Then he pulled a silver pen from his pocket and aggressively pressed it into my trembling right hand. His fingers were ice cold. I looked down at the stack of papers. The bold letters at the top read, "Durable Medical Power of Attorney." This was the final nail in the coffin. This was the exact document they needed to legally bypass a judge and lock me inside that chemical prison indefinitely. I slowly wrapped my fingers around the cold silver barrel of the pen. The metal felt very heavy. I looked up at the three of them. Dr. Aris was stepping closer, the needle gripped tightly in his hand, ready to strike the moment I finished signing. Monica was smiling a wicked, satisfied grin, exposing her blindingly white teeth. And my son stood over me with empty eyes, waiting for me to legally erase my existence so he could steal my money and save himself from a federal prison cell. They thought they had won. They thought I was a broken, terrified old man who had finally surrendered to the inevitable darkness. They had absolutely no idea that every single word they just spoke, every threat they just made, and every horrific detail of their plan had just been flawlessly recorded by the federal government. I stopped trembling completely. I took a deep, steady breath, feeling the absolute power of the moment surge through my veins. The trap was perfectly sprung. I was no longer the victim. I was the executioner, and it was finally time to officially drop the heavy iron blade on this entire waking nightmare for good. I opened my hand and let the heavy silver pen roll off my palm. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp metallic clatter that echoed loudly through the silent living room. The pathetic, violently shaking old man they had been mocking just seconds ago completely disappeared. I sat up perfectly straight in my leather armchair. I squared my shoulders, feeling the familiar rigid strength return to my spine. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my suit jacket. Bradley instinctively took a half-step backward, his brow furrowing in sudden confusion. I did not pull out a handkerchief to wipe away tears. I pulled out a thick, hand-rolled Cuban cigar and a heavy brass lighter. I placed the cigar between my teeth, flicked the lighter open, and drew a deep, steady breath. The tip glowed bright orange, casting a warm light over my face. I blew a thick cloud of blue smoke directly toward my son. The sweet, pungent smell of tobacco immediately overpowered the sterile scent of the doctor's medical bag and the sickeningly sweet perfume Monica was wearing. I stared dead into Bradley's eyes. The arrogant, impatient expression on his face slowly melted away instantly, replaced by a deep, creeping uncertainty. He looked down at the unsigned medical power of attorney resting on my lap, and then he looked back up at me. He finally realized that the man sitting in front of him was not a victim. He was looking at the founder of Callahan Freight, the man who had crushed ruthless corporate rivals and survived decades of brutal industry wars. "What are you doing, Dad?" Bradley asked, his voice suddenly losing its authoritative edge. "You need to sign that paper right now. We do not have time for this game." I took another slow drag from my cigar. "There is no game, Bradley," I said, my voice dropping an octave, completely steady and devoid of any fake weakness. "And there is no dementia. My memory is absolutely perfect. For example, I distinctly remember you handing me a poisoned glass of champagne at my birthday party. I remember checking the security camera footage on my porch and hearing your lovely wife demand that you call this disgraced pill pusher to lock me away. And I certainly remember reviewing the ghost audit of my company servers this weekend, the one that exposed the $4 million cryptocurrency debt you accumulated by stealing from the employee pension fund." The color instantly drained from Bradley's face. He looked as though all the blood in his body had suddenly pooled in his shoes. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, breathless gasp came out. Monica stepped back, her eyes widening in absolute horror. She looked frantically toward the front door, the heavy designer handbag slipping from her grasp and hitting the floor. Dr. Victor Aris froze completely. He looked down at the syringe filled with heavy sedatives still gripped tightly in his right hand. He was a criminal, but he was not stupid. He instantly recognized the terrifying sound of a trap snapping entirely shut. He quickly turned toward the hallway, desperately looking for an exit. But it was far too late. I did not even have to raise my voice. I simply looked past them and gave a single firm nod toward the heavy sliding wooden doors that separated the living room from my formal dining area. The doors exploded open with a deafening crash. The sudden noise was like a bomb going off inside the quiet house. Over a dozen heavily armed tactical officers from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the local Columbus Police Department stormed into the room. They wore dark ballistic vests with large yellow letters printed across their chests. The room was instantly filled with the blinding glare of tactical flashlights and the overwhelming, terrifying sound of authoritative voices shouting commands. "FBI, drop the weapon," a booming voice commanded. "Put your hands exactly where we can see them right now." Dr. Aris panicked. He took a sudden, jerky step backward, raising the syringe as if he meant to use it as a pathetic weapon to defend himself. He did not even make 2 steps. 2 massive tactical officers closed the distance in a fraction of a second. They hit the corrupt psychiatrist with the force of a runaway freight train. Aris was lifted completely off his feet and slammed brutally onto the hardwood floor. The syringe flew from his hand, skittering uselessly under the sofa. An officer drove his knee sharply into the doctor's back, violently twisting his arms behind him and securing his wrists with heavy steel handcuffs. The doctor let out a muffled groan of pain as his face was pressed firmly against the floorboards. Bradley stood frozen in the absolute center of the chaos. His expensive Italian suit suddenly looked ridiculous, completely out of place against the raw, violent reality of a federal raid. Special Agent Miller stepped through the perimeter of tactical officers, his badge clearly displayed on his belt. He walked directly up to my son. Bradley looked completely broken, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. He slowly sank down onto his knees, raising his shaking hands into the air, without anyone even touching him. "Richard Bradley Callahan." Agent Miller said, his voice cold and relentlessly professional. "You are under arrest. You are being charged with severe wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, criminal conspiracy to commit medical kidnapping, and the attempted poisoning of a senior citizen. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Miller read the harsh, uncompromising words of the Miranda rights, another agent stepped behind Bradley, forcefully pulling his arms down and securing the heavy metal cuffs around his wrists. The metallic click echoed loudly through the room. Bradley squeezed his eyes tightly shut, tears of absolute terror and complete ruin streaming down his pale cheeks. He finally understood the massive gravity of his actions. He was not just losing his lavish lifestyle or his position at the company. He was losing his freedom entirely. He was going to spend the absolute best years of his remaining life wearing a uniform inside a federal penitentiary surrounded by concrete and steel. Monica was completely hysterical. She backed herself into the corner of the room, letting out a series of piercing, high-pitched screams as 2 female officers approached her. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked wildly, thrashing her arms. "I did not do anything wrong. I am a victim here. My husband is crazy. I am wealthy. You cannot do this to me. I will sue this entire department." One of the female officers easily caught Monica's flailing wrists, locking them firmly in iron cuffs. "You are not wealthy anymore, ma'am," the officer stated calmly, ignoring the frantic screaming. "As of 20 minutes ago, the federal government officially seized every single bank account tied to your name. Your credit cards are frozen. Your luxury vehicles are being actively impounded, and your house is surrounded by agents. You literally own nothing." Monica let out a final agonizing wail of despair. I stood quietly in the center of my living room, watching the complete and utter collapse of the people who had tried to bury me. Monica continued to scream, her shrill voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings as the female officers physically dragged her toward the front door. She kicked her expensive heels against the hardwood floor, desperately demanding a lawyer she could no longer afford. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for her. She had been the venomous architect of my intended demise, and now she was choking on her own poison. I took one final drag from my cigar, crushing it out in the crystal ashtray. The tactical officers were systematically securing the perimeter, collecting Dr. Aris and his medical bag, taking the discarded syringe as concrete federal evidence. The house that had once been a quiet sanctuary was now an active crime scene, illuminated by the harsh, sweeping beams of police flashlights. I slowly turned my attention back to the center of the room. Bradley was still kneeling on the floor, his head bowed heavily toward his chest. His expensive suit was wrinkled and covered in dust. The heavy steel handcuffs forced his shoulders into an unnatural, defeated posture. He was softly crying the pathetic, broken sobs of a man who suddenly realized he had absolutely nothing left. I walked over and stood directly in front of him, my work boots stopping inches from his knees. He slowly raised his head to look at me. His eyes were red and bloodshot, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling violently. "Dad, please. I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I was drowning in debt and I panicked. You have to tell them to stop. Please tell them you forgive me. I am your only son. You cannot let them take me away to prison." I looked down at him, feeling a profound emptiness where my paternal love used to be. "You stopped being my son the moment you handed me that poisoned glass of champagne," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "I spent 40 years of my life bleeding for this family. I drove heavy trucks through blinding snowstorms. I broke my bones and I sacrificed my own health to make sure you never had to struggle for a single day in your entire life. I bought you that expensive suit. I paid for that fancy education. I handed you an executive title at a company you did not build. I gave you everything, Bradley, but you never learned the one lesson that mattered. You never learned the difference between earning respect and stealing it. A man who earns his keep builds an empire with his own 2 hands. A coward tries to steal it by drugging his own father. You wanted to lock me in a padded room so you could steal the retirement money of the men and women who trusted me. You tried to throw my life away. So no, Bradley, I will not tell them to stop. You are going to pay your own debts." I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on him, leaving him kneeling in the dust, surrounded by federal agents. I walked across the living room, my footsteps heavy and resolute, and stepped out through the open front door. The freezing winter air hit my face sharp and clean. My entire front yard was bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of a dozen police cruisers. Neighbors were standing on their porches watching the downfall of Bradley Callahan. I walked down the wooden steps, ignoring the chaos and the shouting officers. I walked straight down the driveway, leaving the house, the money, and the wreckage of my fake family far behind me. I was walking away from the past, stepping into a brand new dawn. Parked safely at the end of the street, well outside the chaotic perimeter of the raid, was a sleek black town car. Jonathan Pierce was leaning against the rear door, his hands deep in his coat pockets. When he saw me walking toward him, he offered a single respectful nod. He reached out and pulled the heavy car door open. Sitting in the back seat, wrapped securely in a warm blanket, was Lily. Her dark curls were slightly messy, but her eyes were bright and entirely free of fear. When she saw me, her face lit up with a brilliant, genuine smile. "Grandpa," she cried out, scrambling across the leather seat. I leaned into the car and wrapped my arms around her, hugging her tightly against my chest. I buried my face in her hair, feeling the first real, profound sense of peace I had felt in days. "I told you I would fix it, sweetheart," I whispered. "You are safe now. Nobody is ever going to hurt you or lock you away. We are going to be completely fine." I climbed into the car beside her, and Jonathan closed the door, sealing us inside a quiet, safe sanctuary. I told the driver to take us away from the city, heading north toward the lake cabin I had purchased years ago. Lily leaned her head against my shoulder, finally resting after days of sheer terror. We were going to go fishing tomorrow morning. I was going to spend the rest of my years raising the only person in this world who genuinely loved me for who I was, not for what I owned. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helped you in any way or gave you the courage to face a toxic situation, please share it. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace? Let me know which city you are listening from in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next life story.